A plumber in Ohio opened his toolbox last year and picked up a Craftsman ratchet he had owned for less than 6 months. He torqued a half-inch bolt on a water heater fitting and the mechanism skipped, sending his knuckles into a copper stub-out. He bled through 2 bandages before he stopped to look at the ratchet closely. Stamped on the side, in small letters he had never noticed, were 2 words, "Made in China." He had bought the ratchet assuming it was American-made, the way every Craftsman ratchet had been for the better part of a century. The packaging looked the same. The price had actually gone up. But somewhere between the last time he bought Craftsman and this time, the production had moved to a factory 12,000 miles away, and nobody told him. This is not an isolated story. It is the story of the American tool industry over the past 2 decades. Craftsman moved the majority of its hand tool production overseas, starting around 2010, and accelerated the shift after Stanley Black & Decker acquired the brand in 2017. But Craftsman is not the exception. It is the rule. Stanley, DeWalt, Cobalt, Husky, and dozens of other names that built their reputations on American manufacturing have quietly relocated production to China, Taiwan, Mexico, and India. The brands kept their heritage logos. They kept their American flag color schemes. They kept their pricing. What they did not keep was the manufacturing. Walk into any big box hardware store today and pick up 10 hand tools at random. Read the fine print on each one. You will be fortunate to find 2 that were made in the United States. The result is that millions of buyers are purchasing tools based on brand loyalty that was earned by a product that no longer exists. The name on the wrench is the same. The steel inside it is not. But here is what almost nobody talks about. Not every company left. Scattered across small towns in Pennsylvania, Kansas, Illinois, Minnesota, Oregon, and Wisconsin, a handful of manufacturers are still forging, machining, and assembling tools on American soil, in some cases in the same factories where they started over 100 years ago. These are the 7 you should know about, and why the window to support them may not stay open forever. The first tool on this list is one you have probably seen 1,000 times without thinking about where it came from. Channel lock tongue and groove pliers. The ones with the sky blue grips that have been the same trademarked shade since 1956. They are made in Meadville, Pennsylvania, in 2 facilities totaling 260,000 square feet, by a company that has been in the same town since a blacksmith named George Dermont started hand-forging farrier's tools in 1886. The company is now run by the 4th and 5th generation of the Dermont family. They employ over 350 people in Crawford County, and they manufacture more than 75 types and sizes of pliers without ever moving the operation overseas. Every plier is forged and finished in-house, which means Channel Lock controls the steel quality from raw material to final product. That vertical integration is the reason the tongue and groove joint on a Channel Lock plier holds its position under load instead of slipping the way imported knockoffs do after 6 months of job site use. A pair of Channel Lock 440s costs around $25. The imported equivalent costs $12 and rounds out its jaw teeth within a year. The difference is not branding. The difference is what happens inside the forge. The second tool is the one professional electricians already know. Klein Tools Lineman's Pliers. Klein was founded in 1857, which makes it older than the state of Oklahoma. The company is headquartered in Lincolnshire, Illinois, and operates manufacturing plants across Illinois, Texas, Arkansas, New York, and Michigan. It is still family-owned. Klein has invested over $100 million in expanding domestic production, rather than chasing cheaper labor overseas, and it manufactures 14 times more products in the United States than in any other country. The reason electricians trust Klein with their lives is not sentimental. A lineman's plier is used to grip, twist, and cut wire on circuits that can carry lethal voltage. The jaw geometry, the pivot tension, and the hardness of the cutting edge have to be identical from one tool to the next. That consistency requires controlling the forging, heat treatment, and finishing under one roof, which is exactly what Klein does in Mansfield, Texas. An imported plier at half the price might work fine on the first cut. The question is whether it works fine on the 10,000th. These two companies are well known among professionals. But the next tools on this list are ones most buyers have never heard of, and they are the ones that need your attention most. Most people have never heard of Wild Tool. That is part of the problem. Wild operates out of a factory on Pottawatomie Street in Hiawatha, Kansas, a town of about 3,000 people in the northeast corner of the state. The company was started in 1922 in Kansas City when a man named Otto Froschel figured out that angling the nose of a pair of pliers by 32 degrees gave you far more grip strength. That idea became the first angle nose plier, patented in 1931, and it is now a standard design used by plier makers all over the world. Wild still makes them. The company is still run by the Froschel family, now in its third and fourth generation. During the World War II, when steel was being taken for the war effort, Wild kept the doors open by making bayonets for the M1 Garand rifle. Today they make pliers, pry bars, chisels, punches, scrapers, and wrenches, all forged and finished in that same Kansas factory. Every product carries a lifetime warranty. A Wild slip joint plier costs about $10. The imported version at your local hardware store costs $6 and will loosen at the joint within a year of steady use. The price gap is a cup of coffee. The quality gap is a decade of service. The fourth tool on this list is even less well known, and it might be the most important one in your toolbox. Bondis hex keys. If you have ever put together furniture, worked on a bicycle, or turned an Allen bolt on anything mechanical, you have used a hex key. Most of the ones sold today are stamped out of cheap steel overseas, and they round out the inside of the bolt head after a few hard turns. The damage is not to the tool, the damage is to the fastener, and a stripped Allen bolt in a tight spot can turn a 10-minute job into an hour of drilling and extraction. Bondis has been making hex keys in Monticello, Minnesota, since 1964. Their factory sits right across the street from the Mississippi River. Every tool is made from their own steel alloy called protanium, which independent tests have shown to be up to 20% stronger than what the competition uses. John Bondis invented the ball-end hex key, the design that lets you reach a bolt at a 25-degree angle in tight spaces. That invention came out of this one Minnesota factory and changed how mechanics work around the world. A Bondhus set costs a few dollars more than the imports, but you will never strip a bolt with one, and you will never need to buy another. The first four tools on this list are all hand tools, things that depend on good steel and careful work. The next two prove that American makers can still compete in categories most people have already given up on. If you search for multi-tools online right now, you will find pages of results from brands you have never heard of, most priced between $15 and $25, almost all made in China. They look good in the photos. The pliers open, the blades fold out, and the product descriptions promise durability and precision. Then you use one for 3 months, and the pivot loosens, the blade wobbles, and the locking mechanism stops locking. This is the category everyone assumes has been lost to imports. It has not. Leatherman still builds its multi-tools in Portland, Oregon, in a factory that sits in the same building as the company headquarters. Tim Leatherman started the company in 1983 after a budget trip through Europe where he kept wishing he had a pair of pliers. He spent years on the prototype, and nobody wanted to produce it. So he built the business himself. Today, Leatherman sells in more than 86 countries and does all of its manufacturing and assembly in Portland. The company backs every tool with a 25-year warranty, and unlike the fine print shell games you see from other brands, they actually honor it. The reason a Leatherman holds up where the imports fall apart is the same reason that runs through every tool on this list. Control over the process. When you forge, machine, and assemble under one roof, you can hold every pivot point, every blade edge, and every locking mechanism to the same standard, unit after unit. A $30 import cannot do that. The sixth tool is the one your grandfather probably owned, and the one you should own too. Estwing hammers. Founded in 1923 in Rockford, Illinois, by a Swedish immigrant named Ernest Estwing, This company did something no one had done before. They forged the head and the handle of a hammer from a single piece of solid steel. A traditional hammer joins a wooden handle to a metal head with a wedge, and that joint loosens over time until the head flies off mid-swing. An S-twing cannot come apart because there is nothing to come apart. It is one piece of metal from end to end. The company sources its steel from Nucor in Nebraska and employs 250 to 300 people in Rockford, a city that lost much of its manufacturing base in the 1980s when factories chased cheaper labor overseas. S-twings stayed. Their shock reduction grip is not glued on like the sleeve handles on imported hammers. It is poured as liquid into a metal mold around the steel forging, cured in place, and sanded smooth. It cannot slide off because it was never put on. It was built around the tool. An S-twing framing hammer costs about $35. People report using the same one for 25 years without replacing it. The imports cost $12 and last a season. One tool is left on this list, and it is the most important entry, not because of what it does, but because of what its survival tells us about whether any of this lasts. The seventh tool is the one that starts arguments, snap-on. And the argument is fair, because snap-on is expensive and not everything they sell is made in the United States. Some of their cordless power tool kits, welding helmets, and air compressors come from China. That is worth knowing and worth saying out loud. But here is what is also true. The hand tools that built the company's name, the ratchets, the wrenches, the sockets, the pliers, are still made in American factories spread across Milwaukee, Elizabethton in Tennessee, and Elkmont in Alabama. The Elizabethton plant alone produces 9,000 wrenches and 6,000 ratchets every single day. It consumes 6,000 tons of steel a year. Over 400 people work at that facility, many of them for decades. A snap-on ratchet costs around $90. You can buy an imported ratchet for $15. That price gap is real, and it stops a lot of buyers. But a mechanic who uses a ratchet 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, is not buying a tool. They are buying a career-long instrument. The 80-tooth mechanism that gives a snap-on its tight ratcheting arc, the sealed internals that keep out dust and grit, the chrome plating that survives years of solvent exposure. These are not marketing features. They are the result of investment casting, CNC machining, heat treatment, and chrome finishing, all done under the same roof by people who have been doing it for years. When you spread the cost of a $90 ratchet across 10 or 15 years of daily use, the math does not favor the import. It favors the tool that never needs replacing. But the bigger story is not about one ratchet. It is about what exists inside those factories that cannot be replaced once it is gone. The people who run the forging presses in Elizabethton learned their trade on the floor over years, not from a manual. The metallurgists who set the heat treatment profiles in Milwaukee carry knowledge that took decades to build. When a factory like this closes, that knowledge does not move to another building. It disappears. It goes home with the people who had it, and it retires when they do. Every American tool factory that has shut down in the last 30 years took a piece of that knowledge with it, and no amount of investment can bring it back once the people who held it are gone. This is not about nostalgia. This is about capability. And what you choose to buy next determines whether that capability survives. You might be wondering why you have never seen most of these tools on the shelf at your local hardware store. The answer is not complicated. Big box retailers operate on thin margins, often less than 9%. An imported wrench that costs the store $3 and sells for $12 makes more money per unit than an American-made wrench that costs $9 and sells for $18, even though the customer would be better served by the second tool. The store does not care which wrench lasts longer. The store cares which wrench moves faster. That math is why the aisle at your nearest home improvement center is stacked 5 deep with imported tools, and the American-made options, if they exist at all, are tucked on a bottom shelf with no signage. Online marketplaces make it worse. Search for any tool category, and the first 3 pages of results are dominated by sellers who can undercut domestic prices because their cost of production is a fraction of what it takes to run a factory in Pennsylvania or Kansas or Illinois. The brands on this list cannot buy their way to the top of those search results. They do not have the advertising budgets of multinational corporations that manufacture in countries where a factory worker earns in a day what an American toolmaker earns in an hour. The system is not neutral. It is actively pushing you toward the cheaper product. The stakes go beyond any single purchase. When domestic tool production disappears, the quality floor drops for everyone. Right now, imported tools have to compete with American-made benchmarks. The imports may be cheaper, but they cannot be too cheap or too poorly made without losing credibility against the domestic standard. Remove that standard, and there is nothing stopping the race to the bottom. You also lose supply chain independence, which is not an abstract concept anymore. Anyone who tried to buy basic tools or parts during recent shipping disruptions understands what it means when your entire supply depends on factories 10,000 miles away. Here is what you can do. Buy one American-made tool this year instead of the import. 1. The price difference on a single hand tool is often $10 to $20, less than what you spend on lunch without thinking about it. You can order Channellock and Wild directly from their websites. Klein and Bondhus are available at most electrical and industrial supply houses. Leatherman sells direct from Portland. Estwing is on the shelf at hardware stores nationwide if you look past the imports. Snap-on comes to you on the truck. These 7 companies are not relics. They are proof that it is still possible to build something right on American soil when the people in charge decide that quality matters more than the lowest possible cost. The only question left is whether enough of us care to keep that decision alive.